I tell you that Ultimate Sea Moss will change your life, get a bottle. This is some of the strongest sea moss, Irish sea moss you're going to find. And even the raw stuff's great. This is super strong. And it's got a bunch of other concentrated superfood herbals in it, the bladderwrack and the burdock root and more. This just does insane things in your body. It would take an hour to go over all the things that are in it. But look into Irish sea moss. It is right up there as one of the top super ingredients, super nutrients. We have the powdered capsules that are twice as strong. Trust me again. Get the capsules. They're even better. And I'm not poo-pooing the gummies. But if you like the gummies, which you got and you went crazy with, then you're going to really love this. And again, there's way more than 30 essential vitamins and 20-something essential minerals. There's a whole bunch, it's the government list of some is essential. There's a bunch of other trace elements and things that are known to be really good as well. It has 98 vitamins and minerals in it. 98. That's what's in the sea moss. And the type of iodine it's got, the way it's bioavailable is just very special. And it gets all into the science of it. But there's over 2 billion people with cognitive disabilities and serious problems, according to the WHO's own numbers. And I actually agree with those numbers. I mean, iodine is a huge problem. And most iodine you get in food is bound to other elements. And so you don't get hardly any absorption. The type of organic iodine in the sea moss, for whatever reason, just goes right in and just does the trick. And if you want radiant skin, I'll just be quite frank with you. We're adults here. People make jokes of it, but I mean, raging hard-ons.
President Trump's been fighting the globalists for years, and now he's got them right by the throat. But there's a lot of traitors, a lot of cowards hiding in the shadows. That's why we, the American people, have got to stay focused and have President Trump's fucking back. That's why I'm counting on every person in the Jones InfoWar army to step their game up like President Trump and Elon Musk and the rest of the Patriot crew of Spartans are doing. That's why I'm more committed now than I've ever been in the fight. I'm 20 hours a day committed, and I hate it when I go to sleep. I jump out of bed more fired up than ever with the spirit of 1776. That's why I'm telling the globalists we're coming for your asses, and there's nothing you can do. You're fucked. It's time for all the MAGA and Maha maniacs across America and the world to wear their colors proud so the globalists and all their minions know we outnumber you 10 to 1. So get their shirt now at realalexjones.com or get the big balls or biggest balls ball caps today and keep Alex Jones at the tip of the spear in the fight. I'm counting on you, brother.
I did try to shove that into the beginning of the introduction with the hopes of not completely ruining the show. But it's really, really important to see that as my friend Mark has just typed into the chat, they are actually mocking us. And if you can't see how we are being mocked, is the show ruined? Darn it. I'm sorry, free mayonnaise. Well, you can tune out then, I guess. Ha ha! Anyway, here we go. Ladies and gentlemen, the voice that you hear is the voice of Jonathan Couey. I'm coming to you live out of my garage in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. It's the 14th of February, 2025. Don't let Cupid shoot you with an arrow. You can find the record of my work as an academic biologist by looking on the National Library of Medicine's website, PubMed, and putting in my last name, Couey, the first name, J and J. And incidentally, for quite a few of the people that some of you may follow, you may also be able to put their name and initials into PubMed and find the record of their work in academia. And you might be surprised at what you find depending on who you put in there. So Again, I'm just a biology coach. I can only tell you what exercises you need to do or give you suggestions. I can't do the exercises for you. Track these people down, figure out what they were doing, what they were saying, where they were putting their chips before the pandemic. And I think you're going to find that very few people that are in front of us right now are good guys. Thank you very much for being here. I'm going to see you in a few minutes.
By about 1660, John Locke wrote that day laborers and tradesmen, spinsters and dairymaids must be told what to believe. The greatest part cannot know, and therefore they must believe.
Scientific questions, I think, are very hard to get a handle on. And the reason for this is that in late modernity, which we're living in, there's simply too much knowledge for any individual human to understand all of it. And so, in this world of extreme hyper-specialization, where it's narrower and narrower subsets of experts policing themselves and talking about how great they are, the string theorists talking about how great string theory is, the cancer researchers talking about how they're just about to cure cancer, the quantum computer researchers are just about to build, a quantum computer that will be a massive breakthrough. And then if you were to say that all these fields, not much is happening, people just don't have the authority for this. And this is somehow a very different feel for science or knowledge than you would have had in 1800 or even in 1900. In 1800, Goethe could still understand just about everything.
Right.
1900, Hilbert could still understand just about all of mathematics. And so this sort of specialization, I think, has made it a much harder.
It's literally turning into worst case scenario.
The latest data tells us that we're dealing with essentially a worst case scenario.
turning into worst
I'm
case
afraid
scenario.
that the latest data tells us that we're dealing with
It's
essentially
literally
a worst
turning
case
into
scenario.
worst case scenario.
I'm afraid that the latest data tells us that we're
It's
dealing
literally
with
turning
essentially a
into
worst case scenario. I'm afraid that the latest data.
The government fears Alex Jones, who has the largest audience in the country, bigger than any of the networks, the biggest megaphone in the country.
The deep state hates Alex Jones with a vengeance.
Alex Jones is the most extraordinary person I've ever met.
But you can tell if someone's lying. You can sort of feel it in people. And I have lied. I'm sure I'll lie again. I don't want to lie. I don't think I'm a liar. I try not to be a liar. I don't want to be a liar. I think it's really important not to be a liar.
That there is a very real difference between the people who are raised in a world where they trust people, they trust others, and because they trust others, they have a built-in vulnerability, a built-in deficiency compared to the people who are raised in a world where they don't trust others. Because when you're raised in a world where you don't trust, you can always learn to trust. But when you're raised in a world where you trust first, it's very difficult to train that person to know when to not trust someone else.
The political cut I have on the specialization is always that if you analyze the politics of science, the specialization should make you suspicious. Because if it's gotten harder to evaluate what's going on, then it's presumably gotten easier for people to lie and to exaggerate, and then one should be a little bit suspicious, and that's sort of my starting bias.
He introduced Jonathan, who's going to talk about his latest kind of distillation of what the pandemic means to society, to biology, to science, and to democracy, and to the whole kind of idea of empiricism and integrity. And then each of us, this incredible preeminent panel that we have, each one of you is going to get a chance to comment.
I'm not sure exactly who he is. His name is JJCouey, and I believe he's a consultant for CHD, and I believe he has a PhD in some sort of scientific discipline, from what I understand.
the question about pandemic. And Stephen, your immunology professor said very good because the question was very good. And of course, as I've been trying to say for 4 years now, there is no pandemic. There was no pandemic, and there will be no pandemic. And it's like Jay said, the RNA can't pandemic. It can't. And there's no reason to discuss this anymore because it's clear. And if it's clear, we shouldn't waste time talking about it.
The rules, protect yourself at all times. Follow my instructions. Keep it clean, touch gloves if you wish, and let's do it.
Sweaty palms.
This is so crazy. Like goosebumps. This is so crazy. I feel so nervous. Like, what in the world, man?
I don't care how you get there. I don't care what you do to get there. The goal is to win.
What time is it?
Game time! Woo!
So let me take you guys through that entire 12-bar blues form.
boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, it's gonna be a good show today, ladies and gentlemen. The writhing of this dying in the light of these people is happening very nicely now. It's like moths in a bug lamp. It's pretty hilarious because they have no alternative. They must get us to teach our kids this stuff, and so they have to double down and triple down and keep putting the same people in front of us because there's nobody. They can't pull people off the bench. They can't pull people off the bench, and everybody with common sense has already seen through these people, has already seen through the illusion. There's no way that it took them 5 years to get where they are now, unless they were involved in making sure that we didn't actually resist when the murder was taking place. The truth is out there, ladies and gentlemen, and if we just keep archiving it and keep dissecting the 2020, 2021, 2022 timelines, I think you're going to find that the vast majority of Americans and people in the English-speaking world were just absolutely coerced into accepting something they otherwise wouldn't have accepted. Even doctors and nurses have to be, to a certain extent, forgiven for what happened here. Although I do think that at a certain moment there has to be a turning of the tide, and we need to be able to talk to people very, very straightforward about what they did or didn't do, what they said or didn't say. Because if you didn't have principles during the emergency, then you have a problem. And there are people who did not have principles that sold us out. And no, Sarah Westall did not publish my interview as far as I know. And that's part of the history, right? That's why there's no Panda lectures from any of my Panda lectures. That's why Michael Palmer lost my presentation. This time it could be different though, ladies and gentlemen, because as exposed as they are, they don't know it. I think because the same system that's used to promote them artificially is used to insulate them from the truth. The truth being that there's no avoiding Gigaohm now. Where you are right now today, you have a lot of different choices. These people have a lot of different choices, but many of them couldn't avoid me in the past, and none of them will be able to avoid me in the future. Intramuscular injection is dumb, ladies and gentlemen, especially with an intention to augment the immune system. Transfection in healthy humans was always criminal before the pandemic, would have been criminal at the start of the pandemic, and remains criminal now. And RNA cannot pandemic, so the whole idea is a mythology. And at the heart of this, ladies and gentlemen, is coercing our children into accepting a vaccine schedule that is in fact a criminal enterprise. Accepting a methodology that is effectively ridiculous. The administration of medicine intramuscularly. This is Gigaohm Biological, a high-resistance, low-noise information brief. It is 14th of February, 2025. Biology is the way. Thank you very much for being here. Let me just see if I can figure this one out. Good morning. It is, I guess it's not good morning anymore. It's 1:37 in the afternoon. It took me a while to get going today. I tried to goof around with that peg start, and took me a lot longer to find the video that I wanted to use for that. Welcome to the show. Thank you very much for being here. I'm going to fade this out. This is a presentation of what I hope will become a little bit of a trend. The idea of an intellectual brightweb. I can't stress enough how important it is to realize that the internet is no different than television. It's no different than cable TV. Nobody is on the internet by chance. Nobody's falling into your YouTube feed by chance. I suppose if you only subscribe to a couple people and one of them was me, if I put out a live stream, maybe it would show up in your feed because that's the only alternative that the algorithm has. But if you give the algorithm enough alternative things to put in your feed so that it can behave as if it's the algorithm, then I assure you people like me are completely invisible. We're invisible on Twitter. We are invisible in anywhere where effectively we're supposed to be interacting with people. And while my followers can see me and some of these meddlers can see me, the interaction that I've had with them has been curated. And I think that the interaction with social media is also curated for them. If Brett Weinstein is a bad comedian and his handlers don't want him to know it, then they have to control very hard who's in his audience every night. And they certainly don't want a regular set of hecklers in there telling him how bad he is live on the camera. And so what you have on the internet, I think, is a curated experience for all of us, including these people who think that they are on this winning team with secret access and special privileges and this kind of thing. So I think with regard to thinking about the independent brightweb, I don't think you should follow anybody else that is in any way, shape, or form supported by anybody other than just grassroots Americans. Grassroots foreigners is okay too. I have some of those, and I'm not going to lie to you. I got quite a significant amount of support coming from Canada and from Europe, but in general, my best supporters are definitely American. And it's important to understand that grassroots media does not exist on the internet unless you make it happen with email sharing of my work, email sharing of these links. That's how the independent brightweb is going to come into existence, that people share PeerTube, they share Soapbox, and people start communicating off of these other platforms. These are not perfect alternatives, but they are decentralized alternatives. They are federalized alternatives, federated alternatives that will allow open source code to be used and people to check each other's work and for us to promote one another based on our trust for one another. Instead of, again, this artificial bros with shows kind of thing where everybody gets promoted by everybody else and good or bad promotion is okay. Brett Weinstein being discussed as an idiot is just as good as Brett Weinstein being discussed as an authority, because both discussions suggest that question is worth answering. Just like a lab leak from a virus in China or an intentional leak of a genetically designed AIDS virus in China or AIDS vaccine in China is also, whether you like it or not, it's beneficial to China, because either way, they're a bad guy. Either way, the molecular dominance of China over the world has to be discussed as a viable question with viable answers. And so throughout the pandemic, we have been made to accept a whole laundry list of mythologies that benefit these larger weaponized piles of money, these larger weaponized military states that are using every means necessary to herd the cats. That's what you see happening. And the independent brightweb is the only, I think, alternative way for us to escape from this. There's no way for us to do this any other way. And this is for all the marbles. It's for the grandchildren of Earth. And so I think it's very important, again, and I will stress this over and over now because I do think that this is really just the story. We had pneumonia under control here in Red. I apologize for that stutter for a minute. And then we lost control of it for about 2 years, and then we got it right back under control again. And that's not explainable through any natural phenomenon. But here's where we are.
On this vote, the yeas are 52, the nays are 48. The confirmation is confirmed.
So a dude that I helped as a consultant for about 2 years, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., is now confirmed as the Health and Human Services Secretary of the United States of America. He is the guy who can officially declare another pandemic emergency that would provoke the PrEP Act and all of the, consequences thereof. So that's pretty extraordinary because I have been on Zoom calls with him. I've been on a Defender podcast with him and Malone and Nass and Rose and Laurie. It's a really long, strange trip that this has been, actually. And soon we'll find out if Jay Bhattacharya, another long friend of mine, is going to be confirmed as NIH director, which would be extraordinary, again, because we would have people in some of the highest offices in the administration who are very familiar with my work, very familiar with my talents, and very familiar with, ignoring me, I guess, for the last year and a half. Ladies and gentlemen, I would just summarize it with this one slide. The people that are working against us have decided to summarize the pandemic with the black words above. COVID shots are bad, don't talk about 2020. I would suggest to you that it is simple to understand what happened with the pandemic if you first understand that the background signal, the background noise of DNA and RNA in any medical sample taken from your nose or your throat or a bronchial lavage is going to contain basically an inestimable amount of noise. And that inestimable amount of noise, if used disingenuously, could be used as the source of positivity, especially if the tests are non-specific, but they are for the general signals found in that background that are known to be found in that background. Here's the problem, is that all of these tests were proprietary. Most of the tests that were used during the murder between 2020, 2021, and the beginning of 2022, those tests are no longer on the market. Most of them are inaccessible. And in fact, you might be surprised to know that many of the firms that were responsible for administering, producing, ordering those tests from China and distributing them to local, town councils and health departments that were testing cops and firemen every week, those companies are all gone. Their tests are all gone. That's all good. They packed up shop. You can't even find them anymore. And that's not by accident. You see, there was a lot of money made during warp speed. Trillions of dollars were printed and were spent on track and trace and companies that don't exist anymore, on single amplicon PCR tests to test the municipalities all around the United States and the world. Those tests don't exist anymore. The lateral flow tests that were used in the UK to define the pandemic for the first 2 years don't exist anymore. And many of the companies that produce them are gone. And that's not by accident. And so placebo made the rollout of transfection safe, and it also made it possible for these manufacturers to hit any manufacturing goal that they needed to, and to talk very confidently that they could make it. And I will just summarize it very clearly. Using their test to find their ghost does not make their ghost real, nor does it make you a Ghostbuster. So we have to come to a new consensus, and we need to teach this to our children, that weaponized piles of money, the overclass, you want to talk about big pharma, you want to talk about, arms sales, you want to talk about governments and non-governmental organizations, you want to talk about big petroleum, you want to talk about big whatever, I don't care. They all place highly trained acolytes in positions in the media and on social media and influencer accounts, and pay for those influencer accounts to artificially rise in order to manipulate our habits and opinions by controlling the questions we ask and the answers we arrive at or consider. And they can do that to the extent to which we will believe almost anything if we are skillfully using social media to learn. And in the case of the pandemic, we were told to go home and get online and solve the puzzle. And people like Kevin McKernan told us on many podcasts in 2020 that the truth was being sorted out on Twitter and censored on Twitter. And a lot of other people told us that too. And this was all a preconceived drama that would also include Elon Musk buying that platform and therefore reestablishing free speech and saving us. But of course, we know that's a myth. But again, it is part of the ongoing theater that has been enacted upon us over the last 5 years. Hiding this murder and lies, and hiding the new establishment of a remnant stream that includes all of the testing that didn't exist before the pandemic that now exists as standard in all of our corporate hospitals and in all of our health centers of all of our universities and all of these people's minds. And this was all established by Team Worst Case Scenario, this amorphous group of meddlers that I think extends across the internet and across a nation's borders with the specific intent of distorting English-speaking media and distorting specifically Americans' understanding of it. Americans' experience of social media, especially on Twitter, for example, is being curated by an international group of meddlers and anonymous accounts that are used by them to create an illusion of consensus about anything. Even just, JJCouey shouldn't get credit for transfection. That's an old word. And I only, go with people that I've had personal interaction with. There are lots of other people that we can add to this map and lots of other people that can help you understand how this works. But I haven't interacted with the entire chorus. I haven't met with the entire symphony of liars. I've just gotten to interact with a lot of them backstage at certain stages because I had a backstage pass for a couple of their shows at this Lollapalooza of liars, but not all the shows and not all the stages. And so it is just, as humbly as I can, I know for sure that these people are bad. I know for sure that these people are working against us. And I think one of the biggest admissions is being on stage with Stephen Hatfield. But there's other admissions that I could include here, notebooks of admissions that we can include and will include in the book that describes this history of malevolence. And I think this group photo kind of sort of illustrates what I'm trying to do, which is trying to think about, what are the minimum number of people that would really need to know most of the details of what was going on here, and the rest would just go along with it for fame, for fortune, or because they were told to. It's a national security thing. You need to stick to this, and you're going to go here, and it's going to be great, and you'll have a great pay from your Substack, and everything will be fine, and every once in a while, we're going to have to put out our own article on Substack for you, and you're just going to have to pretend that you wrote it, and every once in a while, maybe we're going to tweet something for you just because we need to do that, and as long as you agree to it, you'll be fine. And then some of these people are actually employed in curating the narrative, having table meetings about what to do about Mark Husatonic, what to do about Jonathan Couey. And some people were brought into the narrative specifically to do something about Jonathan Couey or do something about Mark Kulak. So that's what we have going here. We went into the pandemic with an internet that needed to be sculpted already, that the problematic people needed to be removed or needed to be kind of absorbed already. And that's what they do. They absorb you. And so this is the modern manifestation of what Edward Bernays described already in 1924, the conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses. And social media allows them to do it with military precision in a way that is invisible to you, is invisible to their own players like Brett Weinstein and Heather Heying, and is invisible to their own players like Julian Michaels. They don't see how exposed they are, and they could never see it if they saw how exposed they are, how easy it is to show how malevolent their behavior is over the last 5 years. They would have stopped a long time ago. I think that's the only explanation for why Brett Weinstein approached me so nonchalantly at Brownstone and actually had the audacity to touch my name tag and read it and then walk away as I was talking to somebody else. Because they are unaware. They haven't learned. They haven't figured it out, because once I'm taken out of the equation, they were told not to listen to me anymore for whatever reason. And knobs were turned so that it was harder for them to listen to me. Remember, Brett Weinstein's got a lot of people to respond to, a lot of people giving him money. He's got sponsors to respond to. And so again, a lively debate within a spectrum of bullshit is what Brett Weinstein and his wife do. That's what Kevin McKernan does. That's what Kevin McCairn does. That's what Charles Rixey does. That's what Meryl Nass does. That's what the No Virus people did. It is a very lively debate within a limited spectrum. That's why Kevin McCairn and Mark Bailey could do a stream together in 2023, because they are part of the limited spectrum of debate and they performed it flawlessly together. And that's why all of these people that purport to be trying to save our grandchildren did not get where Brandy was where Brandy Vaughn was in 2016 to be able to say that there's a big difference between injection versus ingestion. And that's why I'm the only person who accidentally wandered here through CHD, never having heard of Brandy Vaughn because nobody there told me about her, and arriving at intramuscular injection is dumb on my own accord. After 5 years of wandering through this minefield of liars, I've finally gotten to be confident enough to say that, yeah, transfection was right, and that's why they're admitting it now. That's why they're pretending to say it now. That's why yesterday when Kevin McKernan was on Steve Kirsch's little experience with Kevin McCairn, he used the word transfection a couple times because he is a liar and a traitor to our grandchildren and knows that I am 100% right, that I lost my job at the University of Pittsburgh because I yelled at people and said that they were transfecting old people, and this is stupid. And for 4 years, Kevin McKernan has been behind this group of liars like Kevin McCairn and Charles Rixey and Robert Malone, all of who've had to focus on me at some point or another because I was getting here where RNA cannot pandemic, which is really the ultimate sort of, it's the ultimate losing trombone for them. And that is why the research and development director of the Human Genome Project has been on my social media for the last 5 years, calling me Barracks, BITCH, calling me chemtrail retarded. These are badges of honor. This is as far as I ever imagined I would get in biology, where somebody who has a house on the Atlantic Ocean, a 7,000 square foot house on the Atlantic Ocean, actually spends time on social media talking about me. It's hilarious because he never says anything concrete, never says anything substantial, and has never said anything substantial. And the two Substacks he's written are absolutely, they're sad, really. And that's one of the reasons why I've never responded to them. And it's one of the reasons why he's never responded to my Substack about virology, where these people like Jessica Hockett and Jonathan Engler and Nick Hudson were trying to get me to write some kind of virology review. And then I started to explain them how clones work, and they all panicked and just left. That's why he hasn't made a comment about that Substack either. No one has touched it, actually. Kind of in the same way no one has touched Piper Stover in all the years that she's been on my review. Nobody's cared to figure out who that is. Nobody's tried to investigate who she is. It's a glaring omission in all these people that have been saying JCouey is lost, JCouey's crazy, JCouey's mean, JCouey's controlled. Kevin McCairn used to say that I was an Epstein-controlled person because I was working with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Now, Kevin McCairn is on Steve Kirsch's podcast saying he hopes that RFK is going to save America. It's really hilarious. It's ironic. It leaves me speechless, except that I predicted it like 3 years ago. The U.S. vaccine schedule is a criminal enterprise, and no one in this narrative, except for a couple of us, will say that. And there is a reason. Because skillful social media use is not going to get you out. It's actually going to enslave your children. The lie that they are telling you is that there was no natural biological reason or explanation for a rise in all-cause mortality. There was no expected rise, no anticipated rise in deaths. It's just a natural phenomenon that we had a coronavirus killing more people, and we have these bumps in the weekly all-cause mortality curve, and that's a lie. And you can see it here in this graph. We had bigger families after World War II. Most of those kids survived. They had kids. And so this little bump of people that's going to retire and then retire again, this needs managing over the next 20 or 40 years. And so myths perpetrated by traitors have hidden murder with lies. And they will continue to do that over the next decade because they still have a problem to manage across all of these Western nations. And so that's why they are also using social media to distort time and try to make you forget about 2020, 2021, and 2022, because this is where the murder happened. They don't want you to look back and think about the possibility that giving supplementary oxygen to your aunt was actually murder, or putting her on a ventilator might have been murder. They don't want you to think about the fact that maybe putting your aunt on a ventilator without antibiotics might be murder. Not treating her urinary tract infection because she has a viral infection might be murder. And so they've known for a long time, sorry I didn't say anything about this graph, that population growth is really close to zero. And the way that they've been supplementing it is immigration. And the Netherlands has done this in the past, and America does it, and everywhere they're doing it. But to the detriment of our cultures, the detriment of our societies, rather than just encouraging us to have healthy families. And I'm afraid to say, ladies and gentlemen, but I think most of the people on this diagram, save the top row, are absolutely involved in working for the slavers. Most of the people in the top row are also working for the slavers, or should be assumed to be. But I do think there are a couple exceptions to the rule up there, at least probably 3 or 4. I think Wolfgang Wodak is probably a good guy. I think Thomas Binder is probably a good guy. I think Sukrit Bhakti has been through a lot. Thomas has been through a lot. Mike Eden has been through a lot. I think Mike Eden is a especially fun one, because if you make a timeline for Mike Eden, you'll just see that the way that he presents and what he emphasized just changes as to whether or not he's recently met with the no virus people or recently met with somebody from Team Robert Malone. And otherwise, he was a pretty good overall source of information. And I still credit with him. But, just think about somebody like Brett Weinstein, who got $500,000 to transition to podcasting in 2017 when he was driven out of the university. He's an old gangster intellectual dark web member with his brother and Joe Rogan and Rubin and Peterson and Shapiro. He actually was connected to me by Piper L. Stover. Piper L. Stover, Lounsbury Stover being this lady who worked in China for 10 years and contacted me via Dan Sirotkin of the Harvard to the Big House thing in late 2020 when I was working on a review, and kind of encouraged me to write it with her, and then basically had access to my review for 5 months before she finally in August of 2021 put me in contact with Brett. So let's just make sure that that's clear, that for almost 3.5 years, that name has been on my website. And anybody could research her. Anybody could find out who she worked with in the past. Anybody could find out where she's been in the past. Anybody could connect her to anybody else in this narrative. And as far as I know, no one has ever mentioned her. No WikiLeaks expose, no McCairn expose, even though McCairn has over 150 thumbnails that feature Gigaohm or myself or Mark and myself in the last couple years. 150. So they had a lot of opportunity to, debunk the state-controlled guy, Jonathan Couey, by, doing the connections with Piper Stover. And again, as a biology coach, I suggest that you do that. I suggest you figure it out, because it's been there for a very long time for anybody to have that wanted to have it. That's why I still have that Scooby-Doo link on my website. So let's go through Brett Weinstein's little timeline. Again, remember, you can very clearly see where the murder occurred. It's encoded in green there as COVID numbers by our own CDC. And of course, in red, you see the pneumonia that was under control for decades, and then we lost control of it for about 1.5 years or 2 years, and then we got it under control again because, antibiotics work. So let's start with this little thing. It doesn't look like I'm going to get done before basketball. I'll probably have to cut this short and start it all over again. Harris on Weinstein. That's Sam Harris on Weinstein's 8th podcast in December of 2019, where he says that we're not going to be able to tolerate anti-vaxxers when we have this new pandemic with 70% mortality. And then in June of 2020, Weinstein was actually on Rogan to talk about a lab leak, and he actually also had a bandana around his neck, and Rogan made fun of him. And actually, he also had Drastic member Yuri Dagan on his own Dark Horse podcast to talk about the lab leak. And of course, Yuri Dagan has a paper about the fear and cleavage site that you can look up on the internet. Yuri Dagan and Roser, what is her name now? Segreto, I think is her last name. Rosanna Segreto. And she's from Canada, and I think that Russian guy, Yuri Dagan, was also in Canada at the time with some longevity company. So I reviewed that paper. My name's actually listed as a reviewer on the side of that paper because I was in drastic with them and was the only person with a faculty position in the United States. So I was suggested as a reviewer, and I reviewed 3 different papers that Drastic published, including the one that Mona and her husband published with The Seeker. So they all know who I am. I mean, the official record of these publications actually records me as a faculty reviewer, which is kind of funny. So then a year later, in May 2021, Weinstein is on Rogan as an emergency podcast to tell him all about ivermectin. And then, of course, that's a month later, he has Corey and Weinstein on Rogan. And then also Weinstein has Malone and Kirsch on, where they sit in the middle and say that, you know, they have some hybrid herd immunity where he's using ivermectin prophylactically and, you know, whatever. And then also Malone is on Rogan, all in June of 2021, where we're almost done with the murder. We just have one more season of murder. And so then after that is when Piper introduced me to to Brett Weinstein, and I was in a Signal chat with him. And these what I guess I would call also either witting or unwitting traitors to American grandchildren, especially Alexandros Marinos, who spent all of this time talking about ivermectin and how Elon Musk is a genius. Rounding the earth, of course, is Matt Crawford, who is so many different ways probably corrupt, including cooperating with a lot of Canadians. Which could make him, I guess, NATO or something like that. Who knows? Chris Martenson was promoted in 2008 on PBS NewsHour as some kind of retired pharma exec who was going to go back to homesteading. Really weirdly parallel to how Robert Malone paints himself on Substack these days. Heather Haying, of course, is Brett Weinstein's intelligent wife. And then Jumi Kim is this person who got brought into that Signal chat a little later. I don't know why she was brought in, but she's been on Brett Weinstein's podcast a couple times. Then we'll just go ahead a year again. Thank you very much. Yeah, that's fine. We'll go ahead a year later, and we'll see that Asim Malhotra is on Brett Weinstein. And Brett Weinstein actually makes fun of him a little bit by saying he's a little bit of a late outspoken dissident. And Malhotra makes a sort of acceptance smile there. Curiously, about 2 weeks later, Malhotra is on stage across the Atlantic in Stockholm with Soph's mom, Meryl Nass, Robert Malone, Michael Palmer. All of them, I think, are definite traitors from their track record. And they're on stage saying that this is 5th generation warfare and you'll never be able to figure out. And Sasha says it's the American DOD. And so then again, at the end in November of 2023, Weinstein is on stage with Team Worst Case Scenario in Romania. And then he's on stage in the Senate in January of 2024 with Team Worst Case Scenario. And then he goes on Alex Jones, which I'm sure you are aware is just one of the best sources of information in America, in February of 2024. And then he has a guy by the name of John Cullen on his own podcast in July of 2024 to discuss the Trump shooting and how many shooters there were. And then he has Kevin McKernan on his Dark Horse podcast in October of 2024 to discuss the DNA contaminations in the shot. And so you can see most of his activity that was meaningful or seems to be meaningful to the skilled social media users. It's all happening after the murder ends. In fact, Soph's mom and Malhotra and Malone and Nass and Palmer are not on stage in Stockholm until about 7 months after the majority of the murder in America is over. And so here we are in 2025, right? If we did this same thing, just keep McKernan there because he was on the Dark Horse in 1024. So this is Kevin McKernan. Father was also into genome sequencing technology to microarrays. He ended up being a college dropout and started as the research and development director of the Human Genome Project, working with people like Mark Lander and Francis Collins. Francis Collins being seminal in the beginning of the pandemic, of course, the first couple years, telling us over and over again, writing blogs about antibodies and how vaccine antibodies might be better than non-vaccine antibodies. His brothers have a couple companies that cure cancer. Their dad died of cancer, so I guess that's a family thing. And he works on pot genomes, presumably because he knows that personalized medicine is going to include that. Anyway, this guy at the beginning of the pandemic, what was he doing? Well, he became famous really because he authored a paper with Claire Craig, another genome collector from the UK who started the group HEART. It's also on my Medler picture. And Mike Eden and Thomas Binder and a bunch of other people that I raise an eyebrow to with the very bare minimum. He was on the Vance Crowe podcast. Vance Crowe is a guy who used to work for the World Bank before the pandemic. And he was on the Vance Crowe podcast 3 times in 2020 to tell us that PCR works, just not theirs. And viral variants are being sequenced. It's really interesting how this is all working out. He was also on another random podcast that we archived a few videos of, one in October of 2020, where he's talking to this girl about PCR working and the mRNA vaccines being really neat. And then a year later, in July of 2021, he goes back on the same podcast where she's podcasting from the same bedroom. And he talks about Dr. David Martin and intellectual property and patent law, and also the Coronavirus Investigative Committee in Germany. And then finally, a year and a half later, again in February of 23, he goes again on this same girl's podcast who's still wearing the same white headphones and still podcasting from the same weird bedroom with no change in anything, to talk about gain of function, directed evolution at Pfizer, and the Veritas video that admits that it's true. Again, not doing a whole lot about trying to stop the murder. Now, we could drop in there that in December of 2021, he came on my podcast to pretty much say the same thing. And then only a couple weeks later, Charles Rixey just happened to be driving through and decided to come to Pittsburgh and do a stream with me about the diffuse proposal and convince me to join Drastic again, because the diffuse proposal is actually real and the origin of the virus actually matters, when in January of 2022, I was telling my viewers that the origin doesn't matter because they're lying about it's what it's done. Now, in that same year, in November of 2022, a guy by the name of Kevin McCairn also came to the United States and also traveled to Pittsburgh and also tried to stay at my house, but instead stayed at a hotel that I provided and met me out late at a bar when he showed here. Now, this is significant only because of the way these paths have ended up crossing, because Rixey and McCairn have been roommates in Japan off and on for the last couple years. And during 2022 and 2023, they've been exclusively doing streams that are called Giga Spiral and talking about how much of an idiot I am. Now, interestingly, I was on a stream in March of 2023 on St. Patrick's Day with Bodwin and Rose and Senef and McKernan, and discussed a lot of these same ideas that a guy like Kevin McCairn says is also silly and doesn't make any sense or whatever. And so remember, McKernan was in front of the Senate with Weinstein and Malone and Rose and Cole in January of 2024 as well. And so a lot of people that were in front of the Senate in January of 2024 know who I am from extensive interaction with me. And I would go so far as to say that a lot of them have learned a lot from their interactions with me. And so then in 2024, 2 months after McKernan would be on Weinstein, we have McKernan going on the Danny Jones podcast and telling lies about the role that Charles Rixey played in the Health and Human Services Secretary's book about Wuhan. It's such a weird place we're in, right? Because all of this stuff is years after the murder stopped. Just as we've described it, they ran out the clock. It's going to be very hard to show people what these people did unless we show them what they weren't doing when the murder was happening. And so here we are in 2025 again. Now, interestingly, last night, of course, there was a white clot roundtable with Steve Kirsch's little VRSF, and Kevin McKernan and Kevin McCairn were on that stream together. Now, this was already predicted by me a couple years ago, because Steve Kirsch wanted me to help Kevin McCairn write a better proposal for these hamster experiments. I think that was in 2023. It might have even been in 2022. And he was even proposing that I would go to Japan and help him start these experiments or work on them, and that Steve would pay for it. And the weird part is that I have those texts on my phone still. And so we could add that to a Steve Kirsch timeline where you would see that Kevin McCairn is actually crossing paths with Steve Kirsch in my text messages, when I already knew that Kevin McCairn was fake, when he had already lost his mind arguing with Mark Bailey on Tim's Truth Show and made a fool of himself in the months after, and then showed up at my doorstep and didn't want to talk about biology at all, and almost peed his pants in a bar in Pittsburgh because some black people got mad. I mean, we're really dealing with people that are so far off script that they're just grasping at straws, bringing Kevin McCairn into this discussion. If you watch this video, which I will not do with you, but if you got the time, you will see nothing but pain. You will see nothing but fake. You will see nothing but it's a charades. It's charlatanism. And maybe what Kevin McKernan says about the DNA is largely correct. Maybe the experiments that he's done are largely correct. But what you see in this guy that has been meddling with me since March 2020, what you see in this guy in that video is actually really sad. Because he shows pictures of what he claims are the clots, and they could be, under a dissecting microscope, and they're out of focus. And then he did some cryostat sections that are not stained or in any way, shape, or form discussed in a useful way. And the staining that he does do is done in such a... it is an undergraduate, given the hypothetical project that he has, where he's trying to figure out what these clots are made of. An undergraduate at any university in America would come up with a better set of experiments than he did, and in fact would probably come up with a better set of pictures and conclusions. It's astounding. It's astounding how bad it is. And Steve Kirsch asks him questions in the Steve Kirsch sort of way, where he always asks questions that are kind of off to the left or off to the right in such a way that the person who's supposed to answer the question is first kind of confused as to why Steve would even ask the question in the first place. But watching Kevin McCairn struggle with that was entertaining. Watching Kevin McKernan sit on a 6-panel Zoom with his hand in front of his face, reading a screen down there, that was also entertaining. But what you see actually are myths being perpetrated by traitors hiding murder with lies. That's how they coerced us into accepting this shot. And if we ever figure out where these clots are coming from and whether they are specifically from one thing or another, I'll be very surprised. So if you just look at this guy, we could fill in with hundreds of videos, because, I've wasted almost $400 on hard drives that I've archived this guy's work since 2020, because I think it is possible that in a lawsuit where these people are all charged with somehow messing with my ability to make a living, my ability to survive, my family's ability to exercise our liberty in America, I think these people have been meddling with me in a very disingenuous way on the internet, using a combination of coordinated lying and anonymous accounts. And it could have really, really, really hurt my family had I not been able to see through it. And it started with this guy, Kevin McCairn, because in March of 2020, he's the one who contacted me and claimed to have seen my JC on a Bike videos and claimed to have worked with a guy that I was now working with at the University of Pittsburgh. And so we had a kind of connection as neuroscientists. Maybe you should come on this stream with me and discuss the pandemic. And so 5 weekends in a row, I was on screen for a few hours with Paul Cottrell and him, and not knowing that Paul Cottrell and Addie Ads were associates of some guy by the name of George Webb, who already had me blocked on Twitter at the beginning of the pandemic. I didn't know that until somebody sent me it was the way I learned about what blocking was. Because somebody had sent me a George Webb tweet and I couldn't see it because the person had blocked me and I was confused. What does that mean? And so Kevin McCairn cited 2 things that I think are very important to see in 2020. He said specifically that Andy Kaufman and his no virus idea needed to be opposed, needed to be destroyed, needed to be beaten down. Whatever words he used were violent. And this nonsense about 5G being the cause also had to be stopped. In 2020, in March, that's what he was sure of. And it could be 1 billion people dead, worst case scenario. Which both he and Paul Cottrell agreed on. Now let's just drop a few of the greatest hits in here that if you haven't seen them of Kevin McCairn, I think you should first do this before you watch that silly stream with Steve Kirsch, because it's really bad. And there's no science in it at all. It's like, it is really embarrassing. It's embarrassing for all of neuroscience, really, because neuroscientists in general are very high caliber academic biologists that have worked their whole lives to get a series of, really valuable skills and techniques and methodologies and master them and then apply them to questions. And so he's making a mockery of that kind of science with what he's doing now. So Tim Truth hosted a debate between Kevin McCairn, that guy up there, and Mark Bailey in May of 2022. And it is side-busting funny, especially when you see it now. When you saw it at that time, maybe it wasn't so funny, but now when you see it, it is side-busting funny. Now, the other thing that is really good is Vajon Health on YouTube, a guy who's had Geert van den Bosch on his stream like 1,000 times, and Robert Malone's been on his stream a few times, had a long COVID spikeopathy weekend seminar where McCairn, Charles Rixey, Christine Grace, and Stephanie Seneff all presented, and the host was this German guy who sells supplements in Germany. And it is a hysterically funny compilation of these people admitting that they're all on the same team. Stephanie Seneff, what does she have any business being in that discussion Zoom meeting with these people? Well, she's in Steve Kirsch's steering committee, so she's been connected to this from the very beginning and before, because she's the one who obfuscated any meaningful opposition to glyphosate, for example. So we have McCairn, Rixey, and Christine Grace is really funny because I did a stream about this at the time, and at the time I was actually working for CHD, and Christine Grace sent some kind of letter to Mary Holland saying that I had done something illegal in what I said about her, and so he needed to cease and desist, or you were going to take legal action against CHD. And Mary Holland actually had a disciplinary meeting with me about it. So anyway, those 2 videos are really funny, and if you get through those 2 videos and you're bored, you can watch this one, because this one's also really funny. Just skip over to where they put Kevin McCairn on screen and watch all the way until they bring Kevin McKernan back on, because it is awesome. And the other 2 guys that are listening are oftentimes just kind of annoyed, like, why are we still talking to this guy? It is funny. It is funny. It is really funny. So what if we did Robert Malone? Now this is just going to be a real brief one, but just imagine if we did a real one. He got a call from Wuhan Mike in January of 2020. He was on the Dark Horse, or the Rogan and the Dark Horse in June of 2021, so a whole year and a half later. He was on the stage in Stockholm with Meryl Nass, Soph's mom, Asim Malhotra and Mike Palmer of Doctors for COVID Ethics, also a traitor, in January of 2023, which is really funny. That's almost half a year after all the murder stopped. And then he was in front of the Senate with Team Worst Case Scenario, of course, because he's one of the coordinators, and that's in January of 2024. And then, like Brett Weinstein, he was also on Alex Jones in February of 2024. Fantastic. And then, of course, in November of 2024, Robert Malone shared a video from an anonymous mouse account that was actually Charles Rixey and Kevin McCairn making fun of Gigaohm Biological and making fun of Housatonic Live. So Robert Malone shared a video of Kevin McCairn and Charles Rixey making fun of me and Kevin and Housatonic in November of 2024 at the election time. And we're in 2025, and I would suggest to you, very plain and simple, who, what, when, and where. Everyone that wants to be heard should fill out a calendar and submit it. Otherwise, I'm going to make one for you. Everybody that wants to speak out and thinks that they had principles when it mattered needs to submit a calendar, or I'm going to make one for you. And so far, every calendar that I've made, it's pretty ugly. The calendar, if you make it with the murder absolutely visible, you're going to find that a lot of these heroes didn't do jack when it mattered. Didn't save a single college kid, didn't save a single old person. Now let's contrast that to Brandy Vaughn, who started in 2011 researching the vaccine schedule and toxicity because she was a Vioxx sales rep. Quit her job at Merck, and eventually in 2015 founded an organization called Learn the Risk. And you might remember a couple days ago I watched a video with her, and let me escape here for a second and start again. I watched a video with her, and in that video I was absolutely shocked to see that on her screen she had injection versus ingestion, which is the same basic thing as me finally saying that intramuscular injection is kind of dumb. And she had a website in 2016, like this video is from a couple months before I moved back from the Netherlands with my wife and 2 kids at the time to welcome Trump back into office. So she's saying end vaccines in this talk, and I think I made that very clear, and it was very obvious from her language. She's not talking about freedom of choice. She is talking about ending vaccines in this video. Now, of course, curiously enough, I didn't know this, but I found it out with some research. In the fall of 2018, she became really famous because she started putting billboards up in more than 4 states. It's like 6 or 8 states. I don't know how many states it was. I haven't been able to find a firm number. Billboards. And the cool thing is the billboards, they had pictures of babies on them, and it said, healthy babies don't just die. And then her website in all those states. It was pretty cool. And then in the 23rd of December 2020, she was found dead in her home. And you can go look for obituaries and stories and stuff like that. I can't find very much. Now, I would wonder what would happen if we would just contrast, the general state of anti-vax in America with this timeline here. So I just thought I would do that again. So Brandy founds the organization Learn the Risk in 2015, which I think now on that website is kind of neutered. It's got some stuff in there about viruses and whatever. So that website has probably got enough nonsense on it that they're not afraid of it anymore. Interestingly, on April Fool's Day, April 1st, 2016 is when the movie Vaxxed was released. And ICANN was founded. Now, I don't know if you'll notice already this timeline, but I chose this timeline quite wisely, craftily, because I wanted to make a point about that video that Brandy did in September of 2016. So April, May, June, July, August, September. That movie's been out for 6 months. Vaxxed has been out for 6 months. In fact, I think Robert De Niro was on Good Morning America in those 6 months. And yet, in September, when she's doing that talk that we listened to in that video, she doesn't say anything about Vaxxed, the movie. Doesn't say, thank goodness for ICANN and these other people that are trying to save us. And I think the reason is very clear, because Vaxxed is not trying to end the vaccine schedule. Vaxxed is just saying that there are kids that are hurt, that the vaccine schedule is imperfect, that maybe the adjuvants, or maybe it's something. And Brandy is saying, no, intramuscular injection is dumb. Ingestion versus injection is something that every doctor should consider, and they don't consider. And so Brandy in 2016 doesn't mention Vaxxed in front of that crowd, not because she's trying to raise money, but because I think she already knows they're full of shit. Now, don't forget, in 2015, in October, is when Mary Holland was on Democracy Now! With Paul Offit and Rand Paul. Rand Paul on her side, Paul Offit against her. Not on camera at the same time, but recorded for the same show, shown opposite each other. And Mary Holland is on that show saying that one component of the MMR vaccine hurt her son. The exact same thing that Polly says in the UK, the exact same thing that Wakefield says in his debunked paper about irritable bowel or whatever these kids have after vaccination. And so on one hand, you have an organization that says stop all vaccines, intramuscular injection is dumb. And on the other hand, you have a professor from Columbia going on a pretty prominent internet newscast opposite Paul Offit in 2015. And it's still on the internet today. Brandy Vaughn is dead. So the World Mercury Project of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. changes its name to Children's Health Defense in 2018 because Laura Bono sat on his porch for 4 days straight with a box of papers about it. That's the story that we are told. In 2018, if you will recall, that was also when she was in the fall having more than 30 billboards in 6 states. Brandy had billboards. And in 2018 is when the World Mercury Project actually changed over to Children's Health Defense. Maybe you'd be surprised that in 2019, Vaughn's billboards were featured on ABC News, how anti-vaxxers targeting grieving mobs and turn them into crusaders against vaccines. Look at that billboard. Healthy babies don't just die, and then she has the baby and the dates of birth and death. In many states she was doing this, and she even got on the news in September of 2019, a couple months before Sam Harris would go on Brett Weinstein's podcast to say that, you know, when there's this new pandemic and we have 70% mortality, we're not going to be able to tolerate this anti-vax nonsense anymore.
Tap in your place. So everything I say and do in here is listened to, if not watched. And then opening of the back window, because it's a much more private way to get in for future reference, for future visits. When I did return home, and the police came in and made sure nobody was here, and then I came in after the alarm was set off, after the break-in. And what I did notice was they had left this window unlocked, like this. And before I left for Sacramento, all of the windows and doors were locked, double locked actually. I went through twice to make sure that they were locked. So after that happened, I didn't really feel comfortable sleeping in my house again because, of course, they could come in and disarm my alarm whenever they wanted. There wasn't really another way to secure the system. I changed the code, but again, who knows how they got the code in the first place. The security expert is pretty convinced that the house is tapped, my phone is being listened to, my conversation, my text messages, and then my computer, both my computers as well. The next thing that happened actually was with my computer. So one of the things that the police wanted to know was if anything was taken in the break-in. Of course, nothing was, because they weren't here to take anything. I did have a computer here in a hiding spot, and when the police were here, I did actually come and look to make sure the computer was still here, and it's here above the microwave is its hiding spot. It's not a place anyone would know to look for the computer, and it's not, you know, especially in being here in only 4 minutes. 2 days later, after that happened, after the break-in happened, I walked into my place to move some stuff out, and the computer was taken from its hiding place and put in the middle of the floor. And so I came back home to pick up some stuff. I wasn't staying here any longer. And that message was there, which was obviously very scary, because clearly somebody had been listening in, if not watching, as to where the computer was. So after that, I decided that it would be best to get out of town, and I left town for a couple of weeks and really went off the grid for a good part of that. So after the computer incident and leaving town for 2 weeks, the day that I came back, I had a friend come with me, and him and I arrived at my place and found a ladder open right in front of my door, looking into the windows, the bedroom window. Now, this is my ladder, but this ladder lives in the garage. So it was clear that somebody had accessed the garage, brought out the ladder through the side of my house, opened it, looking right up into the window, and this happens to be the only window that I had blinds open. So that was quite a message. The security experts said, wow, what a better message than to say we're watching you. And this actually happened the day that I came back into town. So they clearly knew that, well, it happened the night before. They clearly knew when I was coming back. The neighbor who was feeding my dogs came over after half an hour after we found the ladder, and she asked, so what's with the ladder? And I said, I don't know. I mean, I didn't put it there. And she said, well, it wasn't there yesterday. So it means that it happened the night before I came back into town after 2 weeks. So clearly they are watching. The next incident was just 2 days later, and that's in the garage. This Buddha was on the floor. Normally the Buddha is pretty heavy. It was on here on top of the dog cage, holding the towel to cover it up at night for the dogs. So it was taken off of here, and there's really no way it could have fallen, because, I mean, it's actually really heavy, and if it had fallen, it would have fallen, you know, some different way. But I walked in and I found it right there on the ground. The pictures were also knocked over. So then 2 days later, I noticed it first through the kitchen window, and it's not something I have ever seen before, but there is a duck. On my table. And when I talked to the security experts, I said, I don't understand the duck. And then it came to me that I had been on my phone having a lot of conversations about people asking me, you know, are you staying at your house? What are you going to do? And I used the term repeatedly, well, I'm not staying at my house. I feel like a sitting duck, because they can get in at any time. And, you know, I'm a sitting duck. And So that was actually quite disturbing to come home to. Now I have a duck. I have never seen it before. It's not mine. Nobody else is having access that would bring a duck. It's a clear message that, again, they are watching me. And the intimidation is quite, intimidating. And it's quite scary. So after all of these intimidation tactics, it's very hard to feel safe and secure, but I am not gonna go away. I mean, I'm not gonna be silenced, because these are important issues and we need to expose what's really going on behind the mandatory vaccination bills. It has nothing to do with public health. It has everything to do with profit.
She said mandatory
And
vaccines.
I hope that we
This
can
is from
all continue
2020.
this fight. We may have lost the battle, but we still have a war to win. And hopefully by documenting this intimidation, they won't be able to get away with it in the future, with me and with anyone else who speaks out. There's some evil going on here.
Now, I have been in discussion with some people about this, and there are some curious things here. This is 2020. It's not like she couldn't have bought cameras. It's 2020, and she's got a dog at home that somebody's feeding, and the dog didn't see anything, or it's one possibility to consider is that, well, let's just assume that I think she was the real deal. I don't know why she's gone, but I know they needed her to be gone. I don't know how she's gone. I don't know. I can't verify if her body was found or if the body was her or anything like that. I don't know where her son is. I don't know where her son's father is. I just know that she was removed from the stage. I just know that her track record has an interesting overlap with these people who've had no problems like this. As far as I know, Mary Holland hasn't had any security issues in the last 10 years. Meryl Nass has not got an especially secure estate because of her risking her life to speak out about bioweapons for the last 10 years. I'm going to go so far as to just say it out loud. I think these people know very well that Brandy had it right. I don't think there are very many people who have gotten it as right as Brandy, because she said injection versus ingestion is very, very different. And we need to think about the fact that there's no pathway to the immune system through intramuscular injection. A very, very similar thing to what Gigaohm has been saying for almost a year now, that intramuscular injection is dumb. And before that, we had a few more words because we weren't sure. Just like Brandy took a couple years before she finally started her organization and went full tilt. Because she wasn't sure. She couldn't believe it. So we're going to need to walk everybody to this conclusion so that they can see it for what it is. Brandy had it right. I got to be pretty close. And I think other people have been pretty close, and they're gone now. And if you argue the nuances of this, like is measles real or not real, or is the flu real or not real, you avoid this. You avoid the escape hatch. This is the escape hatch right here. This is the one that none of these people can even address, discuss, or acknowledge as a legit question, so they will ignore it forever. All of these organizations will. They have to ignore it because it is central to this illusion that they created. You could make the same map for a lot of people, but right now the bottom line is that a guy that I helped write this book, that I was scientific consultant for almost 2 years during 22 and 23, is now the Health and Human Services Secretary of America, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. And his dad actually worked with Brett Weinstein's dad during the time when the FDA was established. It is possible that Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s Brett Weinstein's father was actually over in Denmark during the thalidomide scandal. And now we're also dealing with Kevin McKernan being somewhere in the narrative curation crew, sitting at the table very early, going on podcasts for 5 years straight, curating the narrative, whose father was into genomes, who himself studied with Francis Collins and Mark Lander and is at the heart of the Human Genome Project, that all, biologists worth their salt understand is a limited hangout. They didn't sequence everyone. They sequenced one person, and they didn't sequence them. They made a bunch of restriction enzyme maps and sequenced some of the fragments that they thought were interesting for things like cystic fibrosis and other stuff that were low-hanging fruit. That's it. The only thing the Human Genome Project did was establish the fact that, like solving the game of Go or solving the game of chess, it is going to require many iterations of the game. And the iterations of the game of the human genome are you and me and our grandchildren. And they know that. The only way we're ever going to understand the human genome, if it's even possible, which I don't think it is, will be to collect that data and feed it through an AI. The data isn't there. The data storage isn't there. The AI isn't there. The computer infrastructure isn't there. And it still isn't there, but they want it to be. It is part of a decades-long plan that started all the way back with the Special Cancer Virus Program and HIV when Bob Gallo was installing the internet. Curiously, they all say that the FDA is corrupt. Curiously, Brett Weinstein and Steve Bannon have wanted RFK to be the vice president before J.D. Vance was put in place. I don't know how to explain what I see here, ladies and gentlemen, but I know this is where we are, and I know that this means that we have thrown this train really off the rails. I know that Thomas Binder has been through a lot, and I think if you made a calendar of what he was saying and when he was saying it, it would probably exonerate him. Honestly, I think Mike Yeadon's calendar will be one of the most interesting ones because his opinions are very specific and they change as to whether he's recently encountered the no virus people or recently encountered Team Robert Malone. And he fluctuates between there being a virus that they lied about or no virus at all, or hot batches or not hot batches, or murder or not murder, or it's military or it's not military. And it really only has to do with the last person who visited him at his vacation house. Wolfgang Wodak, I think, will be exonerated by a timeline because in 2020 he already told us it was nonsense. Just like Knut Witkowski of the Rockefeller University told us in 2020, and all of these people ignored it and have never said his name in 5 years. And so Steve Bannon, an interesting character that is only on my radar because of Housatonic Live Mark Kulak. And I think anybody that wants to have fun should try to make the timeline of Steve Bannon. You will be surprised at how many times he was on Bill Maher, how many times he was the subject of a PBS documentary like Frontline, how many times he's been on big podcasts now and then, and what he was saying that included in January of 2020 that this was a lab leak and that Steve Hatfield might have something very interesting to contribute to our pandemic war room. He gave us Miles Guo and Li Min Yan, who I think Mark Kulak just exposed as a person who was faking her Chinese accent all along today with his short that he uploaded. The bottom line is there was no epidemiological evidence of spread across borders, across geographic regions. Nothing that would have been predicted by a virus that we were all vulnerable to. And I think the limited hangout trader, Denny Rancor, was responsible for sort of curating that narrative to make sure that we didn't notice that there was an anticipated rise in all-cause mortality that was being taken advantage of, that was being sculpted by murder to create the illusion of a pandemic. And it's the lack of epidemiological evidence of spread that really, vanishes that illusion, but not as effectively as realizing that there was an anticipated rise in all-cause mortality that was coming for decades, that even somebody like Ted Turner was worried about in the 80s. And this anticipated rise in expected deaths was sculpted using murder and sophisticated liars on social media to create the myth of an RNA pandemic that we are now passing on to our children because of this coercion. And this myth is really hiding murder with supplementary oxygen, murder with ventilators, murder with a lack of antibiotic use, because, you know, antibiotics don't work on viruses. I think everybody that was saying that, like Griffin on the TWIV podcast, should be in jail, because that's absolutely a lie. And opioid deaths, of course, are people that a lot of people don't care about, are people, you know, it's awful, but you can hear people like Meryl Nass say that spending the money on the Narcan is kind of a waste of time because these people aren't smart enough to get them out of the situation that they're in. You know, no smart people would take opioids. No smart person finds themselves on the street. And of course, this is a very convenient way to manage this multifaceted population pyramid problem and induce a decrease in life expectancy in America that could be blamed on a virus. Because opioids don't kill old people, they kill everybody. Protocols kill old people. So the way that they got away with this, of course, is that they fooled us into solving a mystery. And I use Scooby-Doo because I think this is one of my favorite cartoons from when I was a kid. It has Casey Kasem as a voice. Everything about it is fantastic. And most importantly, the bad guy is always just a bad guy. The monster is never real, and it is the removal of a mask that always ends up, you know, revealing that or solving the mystery. And that's what they did here. They put bad guys in front of us on 60 Minutes, and they told us to chase them. They put bad guys in front of us on social media, and they told us to chase them. And then when we caught up to them, we pulled off their masks, and lo and behold, it's Peter Daszak and Tony Fauci and USAID. Mystery solved. And so it is really about the grandchildren of Earth. They are playing for all the marbles, because there's only one time in history where there's going to be this many people that can be enslaved, this many people that could be inverted from being sovereign individuals to being experimental animals. This is the only chance they have, because in 40 years or so, most of these people, and certainly in 50 years, the population of the world will be significantly different. They need to collect this data on the way out. They've already engineered the collapse because people are not having children anymore. China has this problem and the rest of the West has this problem. And that's why immigration is so important, to hide it. And of course, all of these people that are at the top of these weaponized piles of money are involved in hiding it. Elon Musk is not smart enough to have 6 cutting-edge companies. Elon Musk is not smart enough to say anything profound on camera in the last 4 years. And him and his friend Peter Thiel have been behind the scenes playing this game of herding cats. How do we control the opinion of the masses? How do we manipulate the opinion of the masses? How do we get a control of these levers of power? The real levels of power in our democracy, according to Edward Bernays. Well, you create social media, you elevate social media, you convince people that social media is the town square. It is the free speech of democracy on the internet. And that is
Stop lying!
A lie. It's not random that they interviewed with that backdrop. It's telling you the truth in your face. It's not random that Kevin McCairn is supported by locals. Locals in Substack are the way that money is laundered after the pandemic has started. Listen carefully.
Scientific questions, I think, are very hard to get a handle on. And the reason for this is that in late modernity, which we're living in, there's simply too much knowledge for any individual human to understand.
Too much knowledge for any human to understand. No, there's too much noise for any human to sort out the signal from it. Because the use of p-values to create knowledge, the false knowledge in the form of the biomedical literature that we now have on PubMed, where the vast majority of it is nonsensical, the vast majority of it testing null hypotheses that are meaningless. It is not too much knowledge. It is too much noise. But of course, this guy is one of the people that's lying to you. sitting there with his little fat rolls that are bursting out of his little fat belly. Across the table from Eric Weinstein, who's also got an equally chubby little belly poking out of his shirt. They are telling you the truth. They have been telling you the truth. This is from one of the first podcasts of Eric Weinstein's Portal that got canceled in 2020 because nobody watched it. Because he couldn't take the critiques. Because people love to critique Eric Weinstein. He can't see that. He can't take that. So that's why he's off of social media. Listen to this man, good friend of J.D. Vance, good friend of the German Frankfurt School of Philosophy, good friend of Elon Musk, head of several weaponized piles of money, founder of Palantir with Alex Karp, the guy who said that he wanted to go to Germany to learn how people know things and whether people can really participate in democracy or not. These people are doing exactly what Edward Bernays said they do. They are manipulating our habits and opinions. Social media gives them the opportunity to do it, and they are using their money to establish this power. An old guard is ceding the power to a new guard because the New York Times doesn't matter that much anymore, because CNN doesn't matter that much anymore, because the number of cats that they are wrangling versus the number of cats that Tim Pool can wrangle, or the number of cats that Robert Malone can wrangle, or Kim Iverson can wrangle, or Jimmy Dore can wrangle, those things combined are cheaper and easier than the New York Times or the Washington Post. Podcasts, ladies and gentlemen. People were put in place before the pandemic because they knew this was going to be the play.
And all of it. And so, and so in this world of extreme hyper specialization, where it's narrower and narrower subsets of experts policing themselves and talking about how great they are, the string theorists talking about how great string theory is, the cancer researchers talking about how they're just about to cure cancer, the quantum computer researchers are just about to build, a quantum computer that will be a massive breakthrough. And then if you were to say that all these fields, not much is happening.
All these fields, not much is happening is exactly the truth. And yet we still are spending billions of dollars on string theory, billions of dollars on quantum computing, investing in all of these things which could, to a large extent, be an illusion. The cure for cancer that I've known in my gut was nonsense from almost day one in science, because to me it's like, okay, if cancer is a random thing, then why would there be a pattern? Why would there be a genetic vulnerability worth seeking out when it's a random thing caused by external exposure to stuff? I don't get it. I never could get it. Just like I don't get the whole idea that autism has a genetic cause that we should search out, because Angelman syndrome does. It's extraordinary where we are, and it is people like him that know exactly how our knowledge base has been polluted, how our academia has been destroyed by hyperspecialization. He knows exactly how it's done, why it was done, and the consequences of it, and he is misrepresenting it as he gives it back, not saying it truthfully enough to make a difference.
People just don't have the authority for this. And this is somehow a very different feel for science or knowledge than you would have had in 1800 or even in 1900. In 1800, Goethe could still understand just about everything.
So what he's telling you is that you can't understand everything because it's not like the 1900s anymore. You can't possibly understand everything. You might as well just surrender to the technocracy that him and Elon Musk are establishing. Do you see it now? He's not telling the truth. He is predicting and enchanting us to surrender to it. On the Eric Weinstein Portal podcast in 2019.
Right. 1900, Hilbert could still understand just about all of mathematics, and so this sort of specialization, I think, has made it a much harder.
Listen to this.
The political cut I have on the specialization is always that if you analyze the politics of science, the specialization should make you suspicious. It should, because if it's gotten harder to evaluate what's going on, then it's presumably gotten easier for people to lie and to exaggerate and then one should be, a little bit suspicious, and that's sort of my starting bias.
No, but he's not telling you to be suspicious of the security state. He's not telling you to be suspicious of global weaponized piles of money, which could also use this distortion, this hyperspecialization to lie about an anticipated rise in expected deaths and sculpt it using murder and sophisticated liars on social media to create the myth of an RNA pandemic. And so while it seems like he's telling the truth, what he's really doing is talking to the other people who understand what's about to happen, the other people who understand about how we are about to be bamboozled, using an anticipated biological phenomenon and it being misconstrued as another. And so what I want to show you are a couple videos. One video is a video of Russell Brand and a couple people from the Rescue the Republic movement, just to show you how they get together and establish an illusion of consensus between 2 or 3 people that agree on certain questions being interesting and certain answers being right, and how awful it is that these foreigners are actually being used to manipulate Americans, because they are talking about America, they are talking to Americans, they are being artificially elevated on American social media. Just a quick reminder that this work is only funded by viewers like you. If you'd like to subscribe or donate, please go to GigaOhmBiological.com and find a way to support the stream. We are here in 2025. It's for all the marbles, all the children of Earth. And I am very willing to put Team Worst Case Scenario on the screen and let you know that certain names are there. This video actually contains Laura Logan. Laura Logan was on stage with the Rescue Republic thing that supposedly was organized by Brett Weinstein. And so
there's no point pretending that we don't all refer to deep in.
And of course, Russell Brand was also on stage with Jordan Peterson at the Rescue the Republic event that happened in Washington, D.C. before the election. And so I find Russell Brand to be appalling, but I just want you to listen again. Listen for the questions that he suggests are really pressing and need of answers.
Meaning when organizing our own lives. The inauguration ceremony was therefore loaded with symbols. Did Trump put his hand on the Bible or just above the Bible? Why have a Bible there at all? What do those ceremonial swords mean? Why cut a cake? What does it mean when you apportion and share a cake? What does it mean when Hermes reapportions Apollo's cattle? What does the word carnival even actually mean? Who is it that
Wow, I see right now I made a mistake here. I got to get rid of this because it's actually 2025. I looked it up now. It's right here. So I'm going to move that line. There we go. Sorry about that.
Power. Who gets the first?
I better make this red too, because then that means we're here. Sorry about that. Just a second. Here we go. There, bang.
Cuts. And who gets the lousy guts? Who is ultimately in control? And what can we determine from the angle of Elon Musk's right hand? The media is going into apoplexy and spasms around this moment of Elon Musk. Did he do a Nazi salute or did he not do a Nazi salute? And look at all of these other people apparently holding their hands at the same angle, whether it's Taylor Swift or Kamala Harris or Hillary Clinton. All of us have been guilty at some time or another of holding our hand at that angle. Now, what I want to go to you first here, Neil. Neil, why is it that we're continually reaching for meaning? AOC, for example.
Remember that she's a South African journalist. There's a lot of South African connections, including Nick Hudson and Panda and the germ warfare guy. It's weird how many South Africans are kind of in on this in some way or another. Again, in American media and specifically on X. I wonder if they'll mention Twitter at all or X.
Was like genuinely, I think, incensed by that angle. And I will say that, like I said on my show earlier, like that's a crazy thing for Elon Musk to do by accident. And I genuinely sort of feel like it was an expression of excitement from a man with perhaps unusual skills. But given the type of conversation that he must have known would ensue, It was a pretty curious inadvertent blunder. What do you make of it, Mr. Oliver?
I don't think someone as experienced on the world stage would do much genuinely spontaneously without having pre-thought a little bit about what he might do and what might happen immediately thereafter.
So he doesn't seem to be willing to actually say that nothing these people do on camera is unscripted. He wants to say it, but he doesn't have the balls to say it. And that's 5 years into this script. It's really disappointing. But Neil Oliver is probably not sophisticated to know how he's been bamboozled and is quite comfortable making a living as this kind of pseudo-dissident where he really never questions much. He just agrees with everybody in his very charming accent. So I don't think he's a bad guy, but I don't think he's particularly clever either. Otherwise, he would see through this.
You know, when it comes to something like a gesture such as he made, which can be interpreted in more than one way, I don't think it's accidental. And I think it's also probably we possibly have had seen enough of Elon Musk to know that he is a provocateur. He likes to make plain that he has got himself into a position where he can do what he wants. And he often does what he wants. I've often wondered whether, I don't know, I've never met Elon Musk. Like most people, I just watch what's presented to me on one screen or another. But he seems to me to be somebody who is neither good nor bad. I think he's morally ambivalent to some extent. I think he is driven to do the things that he knows he can do. If it's possible for him, he will do it without troubling himself too much about whether or not it's a good or a bad thing to do. It's just a possible thing to do, and therefore he will do it. You know, put a sports car in space, orbiting the Earth with a dummy in it. I'll do it because I can do it. And I'll catch rockets with another bit of kit because I can do it. But I'm sure he knew going out there that he was going to make that gesture, and he knew that it was going to cause a heck of a fuss, and that's what he wanted to do. He knew that it was going to set the chattering classes chattering, and I think that was the impact of it. I don't think he was declaring himself to be a Nazi. I don't think he was declaring himself to be a citizen of the Roman Republic or a Roman emperor. I think he just knew that by gesturing in that way at the crowd, he would get them talking. And by God, he did.
Go on, Lara.
Well, this is where I go back to being conscious of what I don't know, right? Because, you cannot, Neil's got his opinion on it, and I try to look at it as a journalist. Like, there's no way that I can know what's in Elon Musk's head. But, he's pretty geeky. He's pretty awkward. And when I saw him do that, I didn't think twice. I didn't think anything of it. So I step back at that point and I look at it strategically. And what we have is a return to the Nazi narrative. But more than that, what you have already seen, from before the election and afterwards, is that we're in the age of information warfare, 5th generation warfare. And one of the main narratives is designed to separate Trump from Elon Musk. Why? Because Elon Musk has extraordinary power with Twitter. What did his buying Twitter do? It did much more than just give, supporters of Trump a home. It broke information dominance in a very powerful way. So up until that moment, when you have legacy and traditional media, and then you have, what you had in, for example, in 2020, when Facebook canceled Candace Owens. They had a deal with Verizon and AT&T and whatever, with the email companies, the phone companies, and they all canceled her. So she couldn't even reach, the million plus supporters she had through text and email. These people colluded to silence people. So when they owned, whether it's Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok, and X.
And so the narrative has nothing to do with murder. It just has to do with censorship and free speech and repurposed drugs and lying about the virus and lying about the lab leak. It has nothing to do with the murder. Nothing to do with population pyramids, nothing to do with an anticipated rise in all-cause mortality that was being used against us. I have to go to basketball. And so I'm not going to finish this show as I wanted to. I will just have another show for tomorrow. But I really believe that this conclusion is sound, that these organizations are they're all created for nonsense. We don't need all these organizations. We don't need them at all. There's very simple. You can just say this. And Brandy had it right, and Gigaohm Biological has gotten it right after 5 years of being in the dark. It is these people that created an illusion of consensus about a novel virus that everyone was vulnerable to, that millions were saved from, that millions were killed by, and that transfection has saved us, albeit imperfectly. I think it's really important to see that Substack subscriptions and book deals and nonprofit positions and world travel and multiple podcasts per week and per day are all evidence of their collusion in this. And it is, through social media, but primarily X was used against us. A lot of these people have a 5-year track record of saying that they're doing it on X. And Steve Bannon has been telling us that Elon Musk is a hero for a very long time. So again, him having an argument about H-1B visas with Elon is just kind of, it's just kind of a joke, right? And that's where we have to be. We have to see that the truth is so simple, and it's actually been so simple for a decade already that someone had it right a decade ago, and nobody ever told you about Brandy. Nobody ever told me about Brandy.
My name is Mitchell Cronenberg.
So this is what I'm going to watch tomorrow. This is a presentation of Erica Ullman Sapphire, PhD, in June of 2020, in the middle of the first year of the pandemic. I think it'll be really interesting to see what she had to say and how she was saying it, because again, I think this narrative was seeded, and I think this lady is a beautiful example of somebody who's just willing to toe the line and read the script. When you see this lady present, it is extraordinary. And again, I have Mark Kulak to thank for finding this person and helping me understand her role in this thing. Ladies and gentlemen, PCR as a diagnostic is a fraud, and how it was used specifically in 2021 is malevolent. The only thing they have is synthetic recombinant genetics. That's how they make biologics. All the proteins that were sold by pharmaceutical companies are made using DNA and RNA in bacterial cultures and cell cultures, and so they didn't need to retool in order to make RNA. They just needed to stop with the process. They needed to stop short of anion exchange chromatography, which would be used to purify the protein, and they had no way of making a large quantity of pure RNA, but they can make large quantities of pure DNA. And so the reality is that they wanted to find a synthetic recombinant signal in the wild or in a bat cave. They just needed to have an agent in China that was willing to say that she found it and report it and sequence it and make a pure quantity of it and send it around the world. Like somebody that would be paid for by Tony Fauci and Peter Daszak and USAID to not make fake propaganda, but to make fake propaganda in the form of fake gain-of-function viruses. Transfection was a crime, and it should have always been a crime, and lots of academic biologists should be ashamed of themselves for not seeing through transfection as a crime in 2020. That's why I lost my job at the University of Pittsburgh School of Medicine. They rolled this out and made all the manufacturing quotas with ease because they used placebo, and they had a bunch of people talking about hot batches to confuse you about it. Endemicity is a foundation myth in this whole fiasco because RNA cannot go from a mud puddle to being endemic. The whole idea of RNA going endemic is an illusion, and yet they have been seeding that idea for decades. Ladies and gentlemen, non-specific PCR tests could easily turn a hot background into evidence of spread, especially if people are malevolent. Intramuscular injection is dumb. RNA cannot pandemic. Transfecting healthy people is a crime. And the population pyramid is will reveal the truth. I guess that's the best way to say it. I think the population pyramid can reveal the truth. Thanks very much for joining me. Thanks for being here. This has been Gigaohm Biological, a high-resistance, low-noise information brief brought to you by a biologist. I've got lots of work to do because Team Worst Case Scenario is just getting started. I think they're running out of money, they're running out of funding, they're running out of jobs because the truth is catching up to them. And I think every calendar page that I make for every one of these people is going to be another show that everybody will want to see. And in the end, I will have kind of, outlined a pretty decent little book. Don't forget, the past fades into mist and eventually will be erased if we forget it. And then the erasure will be forgotten by our children, and the lie will become a truth. And we do not want that. We do not want our children riding off into the sunset. Thank you very much for joining me. I will see you again tomorrow or Sunday, depending on how I get around to it. No basketball this weekend, so I should have time. Thanks very much for being here again, and I'll see you soon.
I have no responsibility for the current pandemic.